Good morning, Brother Shankara.
Good morning. Good morning, Brahmadas.
Shankara?
Turn your volume down a little bit, would you? Or maybe it's me that should turn the volume down a little bit.
Have someone else speak and you'll see if it's me or them. Cindy, could you say something, please?
Something, please.
All right. As far as everyone's concerned, can the shrine be seen over my shoulder?
Yes.
Yes.
Very nice.
Ramakrishna's head is a little bit missing though. It's there he is. Okay. You can even put it down a skosh, but it's it's kind of there. That's perfect.
Okay, very good.
Okay. I'm gonna mute myself.
It's nice of you all to join this morning. How wonderful. All right, then. We'll wait just a few minutes to see who else signs in. We have some of the usual suspects and some new names as well. We may have some people from, or there may be at least one woman from Tennessee, Suzanne, and a woman from, I think, Colorado, named Ashley may join us this morning. People have been being referred around. I see your banjolele on the wall back there.
Oh yeah, I'm hanging all of the ukuleles on the wall. That's the first one.
Very nice.
I'm finding a lot of round tuits since I've been sheltering at home.
Right.
Of course.
Lori, cat.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Good to see you.
Good to see all of you. Good to see you.
All right. Well, as always, a great good morning to you. As pleased as your wonderful self. As that wonderful old storyteller Stanley Unwin of the BBC used to say, "Are you all sitting comfortable, 2 square on your butties? Very well, then I'll begin." So again, good morning. First, of course, we have to address this issue of the coronavirus. So if we could, let's just have a moment of silence for everyone who is suffering as a result of this, both those people who are personally suffering because of being ill and those who are suffering because of job loss, because of loss of family members. Any number of things are affecting so many millions of people. So just a moment of silence. Hari Om. Thank you. For those of you who don't know, there is a practice that's been started of every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but especially on Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There is a time of chanting, a time of prayer and chanting your mantra or chanting Om, whatever it is, for this terrible pandemic that's sweeping the world. So with regard to your center, it's closed except for evening arati and private practice of meditation. Classes and talks are live streaming using the Zoom app, as you see. See the center's website or our e-newsletter or Facebook page for the links to all of those classes and talks. Many of you are aware we have a new Saturday class, 11 a.m. to 12:30, and that class is studying Swami Prabhavananda's, we're reading and discussing Swami Prabhavananda's book, Realizing God, which is a collection of his talks from the 1930s through the 1970s, compiled by his disciple Edith Tipple. Is there any announcement I should have made that wasn't made?
Yeah, Father Shankara, before you get too far along, I think if everybody hit mute in the bottom left-hand corner, we wouldn't be getting echo back in our audio until the end when we talk, because we're getting echo from some of the other people's computer screens.
Right.
I think that's Justine.
Some
Yeah,
people.
Justine, how are you?
Hey, Justine. Some people are getting echo, but all of us are getting background noise for those that aren't muted. So yeah, we should probably just remind everybody every time we start a Zoom meeting as part of the announcements to please remember to be muted unless you are speaking. It's important because it can be disruptive, especially for, you know, this sort of reading in class to hear people clattering and talking in the background. So.
Okay.
I think the mute's in the bottom left.
There's a mute there. In the bottom left, there's
left.
also one over at the upper right of your little picture screen. It says mute.
All right. So we'll go ahead, assuming that people are doing that. We'll open with our regular beautiful chant, inviting us to study together. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the divine being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the divine being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. So once again, welcome. This month we are discussing a tradition of spiritual unfoldment taught by Don Juan Matus. A Yaqui Indian, Don Juan was a brujo of the Toltec lineage. Our fourth talk in this series is Not Doing and the Gathering of Power. we'll see that the meaning of power here is a very special and spiritual one. But just to review, Don Juan was a brujo. A brujo or bruja is a person who is in command of power. As a very great brujo, Don Juan had many apprentices. One of them was Carlos Castaneda, who wrote several books about his training by Don Juan. For these talks, we're drawing from Castaneda's Journey to Ixtlan. Castaneda says a brujo's basic premise is that the world of everyday life is not real or out there as we believe it is. Now, this is not a new idea to us either. This is not a new idea at all to us. The whole idea of the world being illusory or somehow not quite what we think it is very prevalent in Vedanta, of course, and in Sanatana Dharma, all of the 6 schools in one way or another. A brujo explains that reality, the world as you know it, is only a description that was relentlessly taught to you in childhood until the moment when you were capable of perceiving the world as it was described to you. At that moment, you became a member. This is the brujo's word, you became a member. From then on, your day-to-day life was experienced and is experienced as an endless flow of perceptual interpretations that as a member, you know how to make in common with the rest of us. As I mentioned, this point of view is not unfamiliar to us. In Sanskrit, the term for these perceptual interpretations is upadhi, which means imposition or limitation. And of course, this was the way in which Adi Shankaracharya described the world of our everyday reality. It is a superimposition on the reality and definitely a limitation of that reality. Don Juan taught his apprentices how to overcome the limitations of their inherited, imposed description. He called this achievement stopping the world. Again, this idea is not new to us. In the Mundakya Upanishad, in the Mundakya Upanishad is spoken of as the cessation of all phenomena. And in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, the goal is kaivalya, independence, total independence. Total independence is a word that we really just don't think about very much. Total independence through detachment from all thought forms. In other words, setting aside the mind. Detachment from all thought forms. Don Juan's apprentices practiced a system of restraints and observances as they learned to stop the world. Of course, each apprentice was trained differently according to her or his traits and temperament. Yet the principles and practices learned in common, changes in behavior that Don Juan insisted on, are those that Don Juan had applied to himself. And of course, this is the test of a teacher. Is this something that they know that they embody? And Don Juan emphatically embodied these practices and principles. So we've been covering this now for 3 weeks. And in the past 2 weeks, we covered the restraints and observances. And I'm just going to review them by title, just so you'll get a framework for what comes next. You'll be familiar with a lot of this. It has to do with becoming a different sort of person in the world, so that the world no longer is able to impose on you its limitation as easily as it did when you were fully and unconsciously a member. So the first of the 8 things that we studied in the last 2 weeks, we talked about, I shouldn't say studied because we really just summarized them. But the first was you must erase your personal history. Your personal history, of course, is all of those things that are part of that membership. Part of your belief in that membership is your personal history. The second aspect we reviewed is losing self-importance. When we put ourselves at the center of everything, then and we begin to judge everything by how we feel about it and how we react to it, we are automatically excluding the possibility of really making any progress away from our inherited membership. One of the ways that Don Juan very strongly emphasized to think about how to erase your personal history and lose self-importance was use death as an advisor. Think of your death as ever present, and you don't know when it will tap you, as he says, on your shoulder, on your left shoulder. It will be time to leave this world. We really don't know. So keep that as a perspective for just how important am I? Just how important is my personal history? Is it more important who I am in this moment? And this, who I am in this moment, means assuming responsibility for who you are in this moment and making your decisions with more precision, with more intentionality, and making your actions more deliberate and efficient. So assuming responsibility. This then transitioned into some actions. The fifth thing that we reviewed was becoming a hunter. Now, becoming a hunter means the ability to sustain yourself in the world. It isn't seeking of power in the sense that we'll talk about it a bit later. It simply means knowing what your energy truly is, where it comes from, how to find it, and how to conserve it. So becoming a hunter for that which you need and what sustains you. It's part of the Swami Vivekananda's aphorism, first bread, then football, then the Gita. Having enough bread is, means being able to sustain yourself. But in doing this, Don Juan says we must be careful about being too accessible to the world. So he says another restraint for a student of this path, and for that matter, any spiritual path, is becoming less accessible to the world, becoming inaccessible. So that's the sixth point that we reviewed of his training. And then, of course, here's where we really where the rubber really hits the road for most of us. We are creatures of great habit. And so Don Juan says, if you're going to bust up that which limits and imposes itself on you, you must disrupt the routines of your life, the habitual routines. And the habitual routines are so ingrained in us that he says this is where this becoming a hunter, you can use this and becoming less accessible to the world. You can use that to disrupt the way you've normally done things, and so get a new perspective and become more free, so that the yoke is not so heavy, the straitjacket is not so tight. And then the final thing that we reviewed in the last 2 weeks was becoming accessible to power. Now I'm going to use a bit of last week's, right at the end of last week's talk, to use this to transition, because as we know, we're going to talk about now how to gather power and a strategy for that Don Juan calls not doing. And as you'll see, this is also a familiar strategy for us. But this becoming accessible to power. Castaneda asked, what do you propose I should do? Become accessible to power. Tackle your dreams, he replied. You call them dreams because you have no power. A warrior, being a man who seeks power, doesn't call them dreams, he calls them real. Now, what we're talking about here is what is known in Sanatana Dharma as the second world. The first world is the world of waking reality. Waking reality is all that really most of us know much about. And it's a great deal to have to cope with, particularly in these times we live in. But the second world is the world of dream sleep. Now, it is also a reality, and there is, according to Don Juan, by mastery of the dream world, there is access to power. A warrior, being a man or woman who seeks power, doesn't call them dreams, he calls them real. You mean he takes his dreams as being reality? He doesn't take anything as being anything else. What you call dreams are real for a warrior. You must understand that a warrior is not a fool. A warrior is an immaculate hunter who hunts power. He's not drunk or crazed and has neither the time nor the disposition to bluff or to lie to himself or to make a wrong move. The stakes are too high for that. Why? Because death to a warrior is a constant advisor. We are all working on the time allotted to us, this precious time in this marvelous world, as this marvelous and awesome world, as Don Juan said. So the stakes are too high because of what we have on offer to us to dissipate it. The stakes are his trimmed, orderly life, which he has taken so long to tighten and perfect. He is not going to throw that away by making some stupid miscalculation, by taking something for being something else. Dreaming is real for a warrior because in it he can act deliberately. He can choose and reject. He can select from a variety of items, those which lead to power, and then he can manipulate them and use them, which while in an ordinary dream, he cannot act deliberately. Now this has great parallels with the third chapter of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. What you learn to do is, it's called yoga nidra, yoga sleep. You learn to transition into that second world through yoga sleep, a combination of concentration and meditation, and learn to gain control. This is why I said earlier in one of these talks that there is a parallel between what Patanjali teaches and calls a yogi, and what Don Juan teaches and calls a brujo or bruja. It is this command of the second world. Now, it's not for all of us. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, particularly not in this time. But we're taking a look at this so that we know that there are other ways of going about the same things throughout the world. That's why we're taking this up, so that we know that there is this great tradition that continues to persist right all around us. There are brujos and brujas in the Atlanta area. Do you mean then, Don Juan, that dreaming is real? Of course it is real. As real as what we are doing now. If you want to compare things, I can say that it is perhaps more real. In dreaming, you have power. You can change things. You may find out countless concealed facts that you can control. You can find out countless concealed facts. You can control whatever you want. I'll read that again. If you want to compare things, I can say that it is perhaps more real. In dreaming, you have power. You can change things. You can find out countless concealed facts. You can control whatever you want. Now, I'll just remind you that when Swami Vivekananda first encountered Sri Ramakrishna, he asked him, "Have you seen God?" And Sri Ramakrishna, he said, "Yes, I've seen God. As a matter of fact, I see him more real than I see you now." And Sri Ramakrishna, in the next few moments, demonstrated what control he had over power. It so astounded Vivekananda that Vivekananda was overwhelmed. It couldn't quite believe what had happened to him, didn't believe what happened to him. So there is a direct link between what is being described right here and things that we already know about. Don Juan had a limited, certainly not as Sri Ramakrishna, but had limited, but far more unlimited power than we have. So that's where we stopped last week. This morning, we'll start here. I really don't know what power is, Castaneda said. Power is something a warrior deals with, Don Juan said. At first, it's an incredible, far-fetched affair. It is hard to even think about it. That's what's happening to you now. And Don Juan was introducing him to the idea of power and the idea of how to gain power. And he says, it's an incredible, far-fetched affair. It is hard to even think about it. That's what is happening to you now. Then power becomes a serious matter. One may not have it, or one may not even fully realize that it exists. Yet one knows that something is there, something which was not noticeable before. Next, power is manifested as something uncontrollable that comes to oneself. It is not possible for me to say how it comes or what it really is. It is nothing, and yet it makes marvels appear before your very eyes. And if you want to understand more deeply the meaning of these words, read in section 2 of Sri Ramakrishna's divine play about his sadhana and what happened to him, especially when he took up the study of Tantra, which is Tantra is a systematic way of gaining control of all three worlds: the world of waking, the world of dreams, and the world of dreamless sleep, the so-called unconscious, which of course, consciousness is there. We're just not conscious of our consciousness when we're in that deep sleep state. So this is, power is manifested as something uncontrollable that comes to oneself. It is not possible for me to say how it comes or what it really is. It is nothing, and yet it makes marvels appear before your very eyes. And finally, power is something in oneself, something that controls one's acts, and yet obeys one's command. And here we have echoes of chapter 3 of the Gita, that the power that is creating us is not our own. It is the power of the divine itself that is creating all of this. Don Juan doesn't speak of the divine as such, but he certainly points to what we would call the divine and how it manifests. So as you become a successful Raja Yogi or Karma Yogi, finally power is something in oneself, something that controls one's acts. As Sri Ramakrishna said, you become like an expert dancer. You cannot put a foot wrong. Now, an expert dancer is not listening to the music and saying, I'll put my foot here. There's no time for that. It's perfect integration of the music and the body and the action and the mind. It's all a perfect integration, and yet obeys one's command. And of course, this is where we have in the great saints and adepts of all the traditions, we have these so-called miracles. To illustrate his teaching about power, Don Juan takes Castaneda on an adventure. The climax of their dramatic encounter with power took place at dusk, the crack between the worlds. Don Juan pointed out, and I encourage you to read the book if you want to know the details of this adventure. I don't want to take time to explain it, but believe you me, it was quite an experience for Castaneda. Don Juan pointed out that after I had run up the hill for my dear life, I was in a perfect state for stopping the world. Combined in that state were fear, awe, power, and death. He said that such a state would be pretty hard to repeat. Stopping the world, stopping all phenomena, ridding oneself of the imposition of your membership. I whispered in his ear, what do you mean by stopping the world? He gave me a ferocious look before he answered that it was a technique practiced by those who were hunting, a technique practiced by those who were hunting for power, a technique by virtue of which the world as we knew it was made to collapse. The world as we knew it was made to collapse. Remember, here's a reminder, the world as we know it is a habitual, the world as we know it is the habitual world of our membership. To collapse or stop that world, even for a few moments, offers us an experience of freedom, a release that at first is very disorienting, frightening. And this is why it says in the evening hymn that Sri Ramakrishna practiced all his austerities for us. Sri Ramakrishna faced this disorienting, frightening, and you can read all about this. And believe you me, it was disorienting, it was frightening, even to Sri Ramakrishna. As Holy Mother said, when the great come to the, when the divine beings come to this planet, come to this earth plane, they experience all the limitations and all of the frustrations the rest of us do, and must learn to undo them or have that power given to them as it was given to Holy Mother by Sri Ramakrishna in the Shodashi Puja. But Sri Ramakrishna did this for us. So here's this awesome path described by Don Juan and taught to Castaneda and narrated in these wonderful books. Is it something that we want to do? Probably not. Certainly Sri Ramakrishna recommended the Bhakta's path. Now, what does the Bhakta do? The Bhakta embraces everything Every experience, every perception, every thought, every memory, every projection, every dream is the glory of the divine being made manifest. And so you become either the perfect child or the perfect servant, not perfect, but you strive for that relationship of integrity, impeccability, of having this relationship with the divine. It's not an easy path, but it's a much easier path. It is a much easier path than the path of this brujo or bruja, or for that matter, Raja Yoga, or very few of us are going to do what's necessary to really become a Raja Yogi. If you read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and see that it's a workbook for becoming an omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent being, that's what it is, which is the same thing that Don Juan is leading his apprentices toward. It's not something that most of us will do. And it isn't like we're falling short by that. No, Sri Ramakrishna says, in this time, in this place, the Bhakta's path, the Bhakta's path is the one that's appropriate for us. He strongly and repeatedly recommends it. And if you read the gospel, you'll see him over and over saying it. If you want a short summary, just start reading the gospel from page 132, that chapter about Sri Ramakrishna's boat trip on the Ganges with some of Keshab Sen's followers. It's been organized for him by Keshab. And you can see how he talks about the 4 yogas and comes down strongly on the side of bhakti as the path forward. But to proceed with what we're studying here of Don Juan, it is fascinating, and it is one that lets us know that however we manage to stop the world, whether we do it through loss of self as a bhakta, or total self-surrender as a karmi, or however we achieve it, this stopping the world is awesome. So under the heading, the gathering of power, the subhead is the mood of a warrior. Who is a man of knowledge, Don Juan? Does this sound familiar to you? This is exactly like Arjuna speaking to Krishna. Who is a man of knowledge, Don Juan? Any warrior could become a man of knowledge. As I told you, a warrior is an impeccable hunter that hunts power. If he succeeds in his hunting, he can be a man of knowledge. He stopped my question with a movement of his hand. He stood up, signaled me to follow, and began descending on the steep east side of the bluff. They had climbed to the top of a bluff in presumably the Arizona desert. There was a definite trail in the almost perpendicular face leading to the round area below. Don Juan had told him this was a place of power. So they're going to this place of power, this round area. We slowly worked our way down the perilous path. And when we reached the bottom, Don Juan, without stopping at all, led me through the thick chaparral to the middle of the circle. There he used some thick, dry branches to sweep a clean spot for us to sit. That spot was also perfectly round. I intended to bury you here all night, he said, but I know now that it is not the time yet. You don't have power. I'm going to bury you only for a short while. I became very nervous with the idea of being enclosed and asked how he was planning to bury me. He giggled like a child and began collecting dry branches. He did not let me help him and said I should sit down and wait. He threw the branches he was collecting inside the clean circle. Then he made me lie down with my head toward the east, put my jacket under my head, and made a cage around my body. He constructed it by sticking pieces of branches about 2.5 feet in length in the soft dirt. The branches, which ended in forks, served as support for some long sticks that gave the cage a frame and the appearance of an open coffin. He closed the box-like cage. He closed the box-like cage by placing small branches and leaves over the long sticks, enclosing me from the shoulders down. He let my head stick out. What am I telling you all this for? This is about the hunt for power. This is about how these people go about, and I'll contrast it with our own way in a few moments. But just listen to this amazing story of what Don Juan is doing, what efforts he's going to on behalf of his apprentice. He left my head stuck out with my jacket as a pillow. He then took a thick piece of dry wood and using it as a digging stick, he loosened the dirt around me and covered the cage with it. The frame was so solid and the leaves were so well placed that no dirt came inside. I could move my legs freely and could actually slide in and out. Don Juan said that ordinarily a warrior would construct the cage and then slip into it and seal it from the inside. How about the animals, I asked? Can they scratch the surface dirt and sneak into the cage and hurt the man? No, that's not a worry. That's not a worry for a warrior. It's a worry for you because you have no power. A warrior, on the other hand, is guided by his unbending purpose and can fend off anything. No rat or snake or mountain lion could bother him. Just a story about Ramana Maharshi. You know this hill of Arunachala. There are caves in that hill. At the time that Ramana Maharshi first went there, it was still a remote place. It was not very settled. Certainly there was no center for him yet. But he had disciples and devotees, and he used to meditate in those caves at night, and particularly one cave. Because it was still quite a wild area, there were tigers. And his disciples were very worried that the tigers would attack and kill him. And Ramana Maharshi was perfectly unfazed. What did he say? He said, if you do not behave as a man, the tiger does not behave as a tiger. You may want to read that in the stories of Ramana Maharshi. There's more details, of course. And then, of course, there's the story of Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel was a warrior. Daniel did not behave as a man, and so the lions did not behave as lions. What do they bury themselves for, Don Juan? For enlightenment. For enlightenment and for power. I experienced an extremely pleasant feeling of peace and satisfaction. The world at that moment seemed at ease. The quietness was exquisite and at the same time unnerving. I was not accustomed to that kind of silence. I tried to talk, but he hushed me. After a while, the tranquility of the place affected my mood. I began to think of my life and my personal history and experienced this familiar sensation of sadness and remorse. I told him that I did not deserve to be there, that his world was strong and fair and I was weak, and that my spirit had been distorted by the circumstances of my life. He laughed and threatened to cover my head with dirt if I kept on talking in that way. He said that I was a man, and like any man, I deserved everything that went. And like any man, I deserved everything that was a man's lot: joy, pain, sadness, and struggle. And that the nature of one's acts was unimportant as long as one acted as a warrior. Lowering his voice almost to a whisper, he said that if I really felt my spirit was distorted, I should simply fix it, purge it, make it perfect, because there was no other task in our entire lives that was more worthwhile. Not to fix the spirit was to seek death, and that was the same as to seek nothing, since death was going to overtake us regardless of anything. He paused for a long time, and then he said with a tone of profound conviction, "To seek the perfection of a warrior's spirit is the only task worthy of our manhood." Now, this place that Don Juan took him to, this place of power, and its peace and its silence, does it remind you of any place at all? I think it reminds us of our chapel. We make a place of power here. And if you wanted explanation of how, it's explained in that plaque that's outside the chapel door to the left. It's by Vivekananda. What it is that we do, this peace, this sense of inner tranquility that Castaneda is talking to us, is very familiar to us by the name Sattva. Sattva. That chapel of ours, created for no other purpose than to gather the power of Sattva and make it available to us, is maintained by daily worship, by daily meditation, by daily work in that chapel, in order to keep that, in order to make that and keep that a place of power. Swami Yogeshananda started it. A whole gang of Swamis came and dedicated it and left their great power as a result. So we do not have to go to the southwestern desert to find a place to do our practice of purifying ourselves, of ennobling ourselves, of freeing ourselves. We do not have to do anything like that. And if you don't have this chapel available to you, if you're somewhere else, any place where worship has been done regularly and faithfully, year in and year out, it has that quality of sattva. So you can bring whatever practice you want to it and get the benefit of that sattva. Catholic churches are especially good for this because of the daily practice of Mass and the many people who come there who come to tell their beads and so on, to make their japam. Carlos Castaneda found this wonderful and curious man, Don Juan Matus, who, as he said, had a gesture with him to offer him freedom. And then the last thing we're going to talk about today is called not doing. And again, as you think about this, as you hear these words, think about the parallels within our own tradition for this idea of not doing. In a dramatic tone, Don Juan stated that well-being was a condition one had to groom, a condition one had to become acquainted with in order to seek it. I'm going to read that again. It's such an important idea. In a dramatic tone, Don Juan stated that well-being was a condition one had to groom, a condition one had to become acquainted with in order to seek it. You don't know what well-being is because you've never experienced it, he said. I disagreed with him, but he continued arguing that well-being was an achievement one had to deliberately seek. He said that the only thing I knew how to seek was a sense of disorientation, ill-being, and confusion. He laughed mockingly and assured me that in order to accomplish the feat of making myself miserable, I had to work in a most intense fashion, and that it was absurd. I had never realized I could work just the same in making myself complete and strong. The trick is in what one emphasizes, he said. We either make ourselves miserable or we make ourselves strong. The amount of work is the same. And in a completely different context and in a completely different way, this was an absolute refrain of Swami Prabhupananda's, my teachers. He would hold out his left hand and say, you can put your efforts into the world. And if you are diligent and persistent and do your work, you will be successful. You will achieve all of the things of the world. And then he'd just leave it there, knowing what he thought of the things of the world. And then he would drop his left hand and hold out his right hand and say, or you can put that same effort, that same diligence, that same intentionality, that same work into the things of the Spirit, and you will succeed. And if you succeed, I tell you, he would say, this is a paraphrase, of course, not quotes. If you succeed, I tell you, he would say, then you will be truly happy. You will know what happiness is. The trick is in what emphasizes, Don Juan said. We either make ourselves miserable or we can make ourselves strong. The amount of work is the same. Watch the way the sunlight changes, he said. His voice was clear. I thought it was like water, fluid and warm. The sky was totally free of clouds toward the west, and the sunlight was spectacular. Perhaps the fact that Don Juan was cueing me made the yellowish glow of the afternoon sun truly magnificent. Let that glow kindle you, Don Juan said. Before the sun goes down today, you must be perfectly calm and restored, because tomorrow or the day after, you and I are going to learn not doing. I was jotting down impressions of the surroundings when Don Juan, after a long silence, suddenly spoke in a dramatic tone. I should have put in an interlude here. They have gone on this journey to the not doing. He said, so I have brought you here to teach you one thing, he said, and paused. You are going to learn not doing. We might as well talk about it because there is no other way for you to proceed. As I said earlier, Don Juan's apprentices were trained differently according to their temperament and their traits. Castaneda clearly being such a successful writer, was a man of words. And so we might as well talk about it because there's no other way for you to proceed. I thought you might catch on to not doing without my having to say anything. I was wrong. I don't know what you're talking about, Don Juan. It doesn't matter, he said. I'm going to tell you about something that's very simple, but very difficult to perform. I'm going to talk to you about not doing, in spite of the fact that there is no way to talk about it because it is the body that does it. He stared at me in glances and then said I had to pay the utmost attention to what he was going to say. I closed my notebook, but to my amazement, he insisted that I should keep on writing. Not doing is so difficult and so powerful that you should not mention it, he went on, not until you have stopped the world. Only then you can talk about it freely, if that's what you want to do. Don Juan looked around and then pointed to a large rock. That rock over there is a rock because of doing, he said. We looked at each other and smiled. I waited for an explanation, but he remained silent. Finally, I had to say that I had not understood what he meant. That's doing, he exclaimed. Pardon me? That's also doing. What are you talking about, Don Juan? Doing is what makes that rock a rock and that bush a bush. Doing is what makes you yourself and me myself. I told him that his explanation did not explain anything. He laughed and scratched his temples. That's the problem with talking, he said. It always makes one confuse the issues. If one starts talking about doing, one always ends up talking about something else. It's better just to act. Take that rock, for instance. To look at it is doing, but to see it is not doing. I had to confess that his words were not making sense to me. Of course they do, he explained, but you are convinced they don't because that is your doing. That is the way you act toward me and the world. He again pointed to the rock. That rock is a rock because of all the things you know how to do it. I'm going to repeat that. He again pointed to the rock. That rock is a rock because of all the things you know how to do to it, he said. I call that doing. A man of knowledge, for instance, knows that the rock is only that the rock is only a rock because of doing. So if he doesn't want the rock to be a rock, all he has to do is not doing. See what I mean? We go back to this continuous flow of perception and interpretation that we have learned. If we're going to stop the world, if we're going to be free of these limitations, we have to stop making the world into what it is for us because of our doing, because of our constant insistence on our interpretations. It's only a description of the world. As Don Juan goes on to point out to Castaneda, one of an absolutely illimitable number of interpretations. This is the point of view of a man of knowledge or a person of power. Again, we see in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra that a person of power can walk through a wall, can take lead and turn it into gold, can fly, simply because they stop doing what limits them from manifesting that level of power. They do it by not doing, which is called in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, samyama. So this is not, again, an unfamiliar idea to us, but it was very unfamiliar to Castaneda. We imprison ourselves by our insistence that our interpretation, the limited and learned interpretation that we have of what's going on, is true. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of us learn to fly or turn lead into gold or walk through walls. These are occult powers that one develops if one persists in gaining what we refer to as psychic power. But when one learns to stop the world, one may manifest one or more of these psychic powers. Swami Prabhavananda insisted that was a possibility, but that doesn't mean we need to do anything about it. We just are free. We're free. So here's someone talking about this. The reason this is being presented and read and so on is that it is someone talking to a Westerner in a different frame of reference and a different way of thinking than we're accustomed to. Castaneda says, "I did not understand Don Juan at all. He laughed and made another attempt at explaining. The world is the world because you know the doing involved in making it so," he said. If you didn't know how, if you didn't know its doing, the world would be different. If you didn't know its doing, the world would be different. If you stop the doing, the world is different. That was me interpolating. Don Juan examined me with curiosity. I stopped writing. I just wanted to listen to him. He went on explaining that without that certain doing, there would be nothing familiar in the surroundings. He went on explaining that without that certain doing, there would be nothing familiar in the surroundings. He leaned over and picked up a small rock between the thumb and index finger of his left hand, and he held it in front of my eyes. This is a pebble because you know the doing involved in making it into a pebble. What are you saying? I asked with a feeling of bona fide confusion. Don Juan smiled. He seemed to be trying to hide a mischievous delight. I don't know why you're so confused, he said. Words are your predilection. You should be in heaven. So we have our ways of learning not doing, of stopping the world. The one that Sri Ramakrishna recommends to us is the Bhakta's path. And Swami Vivekananda says it is a slower path, but it is very sure and very where we will be able to achieve. If this Don Juan's way appeals to you, I encourage you, get a copy of the book, come and study it with me. And if you yearn to move in this direction, I'm sure that a benefactor, as it's called in Don Juan's tradition, would appear for you. But this is the same thing that we are learning here. It's just that our way of learning not doing, our way of learning to stop the world is different. The state of not doing is called savikalpa samadhi. It's when that which is call it by any name, fills your entire being. It's still an experience. It's still within the realm of duality, but there is no doing. There is no doing. There is simply the experience of that which is. And it's very liberating. It gives you a whole new perspective on that which seems to be, that which we think of as our everyday reality. So that's it for this week. And next week, we're going to do, the title of the talk is Stop. This is the last of the 5 talks. Stopping the World and the Journey to Ishtlan. There is a very touching character in this Castaneda book, Journey to Ishtlan. His name is Don Gennaro. And we'll get introduced to Don Gennaro next week. And it's Don Gennaro that tells us of his enlightenment experience, which is metaphorized as the journey to Ishtlan. So, lots of words, lots of thoughts. Now is the best part for all of us. What are your thoughts? What are your comments? What are your questions? How does all this register with you? Yes. Is that Haima?
Yes.
Hello, Haima, dear.
Good morning, Brother Shankar.
Good morning.
While you were reading, it just, it seems like Don Juan is so aligned with the Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga says the similar stuff, misery and happiness are linked together.
Oh, yes. What does he say?
Everything.
We learn by doing. We learn by acting. So, yes.
Exactly. It depends on our perception.
There's a great deal of what we call karma yoga.
Yes.
In what he's talking about.
Yes. It depends on our perception, how we see. It's like a half glass full attitude, what they call in business field. Like, you know, you can say, at least I got half a glass of water. Or you can say, oh, that's all? You only gave me half a glass. So there are 2 ways of looking at the same thing. And that's exactly is karma yoga, which is Don Juan was, you know, I was reflecting back to my karma yoga nerds. Every one of them are so much aligned with what Don Juan is talking about.
Wonderful. Good.
So much. Yeah.
Whereas there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of Raja Yoga in what he
Yes, that's true.
A great deal of Raja Yoga.
That is true. That is true. Yes.
Thank you, Haima. That's
yes, and also I have
we
one
learn
more
by
comment.
doing is what, as a matter of fact, that's particularly emphasized with Castaneda, because he's such a bonehead. You know, he's as Don Juan continues to point out, so self-important. He believes in his he believes in his story so strongly that it's very hard for him to find his way out of it.
Yeah, I have one more comment, and I will let the other panel members to comment on this. When you said we need to come to the chapel, right now with Corona pushed us into chapels in our own home, isn't it?
Well, that's true, but the chapel is open for you every day. You can come for private practice of meditation. Arati is still being done at 6:30 in the evening, not 6 o'clock, but 6:30. And because that's closer to actual twilight.
But what I'm saying is right now our homes are like chapels. We are pushed into solitude. We are in solitude, isn't it?
As you say, Haima, that's absolutely true.
Our world has been so busy, not even have enough time to connect with each other, be able to sit down and talk. Now Corona pushed us into solitude and be with your own self, go deep inside you.
But here we are together.
Yes, we need this too. I'm glad we have this Zoom. Thank you so much. Thank you for the session. I'll let the other members to speak.
Anybody else?
Well, how do you feel about the forest I live in as being my chapel?
Well, the forest is full of the same sattva that Don Juan takes Castaneda into. Of course, it would be a perfect chapel. There used to be a comic strip that ran in the Los Angeles Times. So it was about a cowboy named Ricochet. He, on Sunday mornings, he would always be out in the forest on his horse, and he would say, "This is my cathedral." So yes, of course. But then also wherever you have your cushion and your spiritual practice also becomes soaked in sattva. Thanks for that. Yes, the door. Yes, dear.
Brother Shankara, can you go over what is samyama again?
Samyama is, it's a technical term used by Patanjali that combines a specific 4 forms of concentration with meditation. And rather than go into the 4 forms, it has to do with objective and non-objective and so on. Forms of concentration combined with meditation. And what happens is that whatever you focus your attention on reveals itself to you in its entirety. This is how yogis learn to do what they do in terms of their psychic powers. They learn that the wall that appears to be to others as solid is in fact not solid, it's so that when they make themselves not solid, they can walk right through the apparently solid wall. This is all described in detail in the powers section of the Yoga Sutra. So it's a very specific technical term about the combination of concentration, intense, very focused concentration, and meditation. By that is releasing all other attachments, all other thought forms with the one you're focusing on.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
I do find this whole journey fascinating.
Good.
Would it be okay for us to read the book on our own, or would you
Of
say?
course, of course. It's an absolutely fascinating read. Castaneda is a good writer, and Don Juan and his other apprentices and his fellow brujo Don Gennaro are very interesting human beings. And Don Juan's attitude toward the world is so inspiring. He just says, so just stop thinking anything else but being glad to be alive. Be glad to be alive however you can. But especially if you manage to get the idea that this is a limitation I'm living in, it doesn't have to be this way, and then bust out of it. Which is exactly the same message that the great teachers give us. You know, the great teachers we're familiar with.
There's a movie on Netflix. There's a movie on Netflix called Humana, Humana. And it's about a young man going on a journey with a South American shaman. And it's just the two of them and their experiences. And it's very artfully put together, and it's also full of, I think, relevant and similar information. Humana, Humana.
I'm sure it is. If this is a true shaman, if this is a true shaman, and brujo are not equivalent terms, but
no.
But a shaman may be a brujo or bruja.
I just think there's a lot of relevance to this topic.
Wonderful. Good. Excellent. Good. Thank you, Justine. And I'm glad you joined us this morning. Good.
Thank you.
Justine is in Florida, by the way, North Florida. Anybody else? Well, my dears, this has been, yes, Cindy, is that, oh, you're not raising your hand, you're doing something. Okay,
Hi, I had a question.
okay,
I wanted to go back to where, Don Juan was talking about the dream world
yes.
as a second world. And you tied that in with yoga nidra.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to learn more about that. I've done some courses with a dream shaman called Robert Moss.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really ties in with that subject.
Well, what did the dream shaman tell you about the possibilities of gaining control of the second world or the world of dream?
He talked a lot about how dreams are, he did talk about that interplay between the dream world and the real world, and multiple dimensions, and those connections between those things.
Well, what Don Juan's assertion is that because we have more control of the second world, we actually have more control about what happens there once we learn to master it.
Yes.
Than we normally do in the first world or the world of waking awareness. That we can attain a great deal of discretionary power through learning to master the second world. And this is why I brought up what happened with Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda when they first met. Because through his sadhana, especially the tantric part, Sri Ramakrishna had become a complete master of all three worlds. But any of us who learn through the practice of meditation and concentration to enter this yoga sleep, which is, to all intents and purposes, anybody looking at you will think that you're asleep. You're not moving, you're not breathing as a waking person breathes, but you're hyper aware. You're hyper aware in that state, and you begin to sense what happens in that world is something that you can be in control of. Or in the beginning, as Don Juan said, you follow things and see where they lead. And then you think, well, I have a choice of going through that door or down that corridor or into that room. And what happens if I do? What happens if I don't? And then, and he has some specific techniques that he teaches, which it's interesting how parallel they are with one of the Zen koans. And one of the Zen koans is, where are your hands? In other words, what are you doing? And Don Juan recommends in this learning to control your dreamscape, your dream world, he says, find your hands. And then he has some very specific instructions about what to do from there. It's most of us never have, and in the Bhakta's path, there's no need whatsoever to try to control that, any more than you try to have only the most practical kind of control over the waking world. The Bhakta lives as a kind of a dancer. The fully awakened Bhakta lives as a kind of dancer, dancing with the world, dancing with the divine. Somebody once put it as doing a do-si-do with the world, and this is so that it's a sweet and unencumbered relationship. But if you want to gain more control, these strategies, these tactics are there, both learning through shamans, and you can learn certainly the principles. Castaneda articulates them very well. You know, Don Juan's teachings, Castaneda's articulation. That's Marla, isn't it? Hello there, Marla.
Yeah.
Anyone else? This is wonderful. Yes, dear.
Brother Shankara, I feel like at different times, different paths seem to appeal. There are times when the bhakti path seems to be what I feel like doing, but then sometimes there's not enough of that natural faith or love. Then the gyan seems to kind of enhance the bhakti, and sometimes it's karma. And of course, Raj Yoga is also there, but it's hard. It's continuous, but it's hard to get that level of concentration. So it's a combination of one into the other, you know.
Well, the thing for us to be so aware of is that those of us who have taken Diksha from a Ramakrishna order sadhu, as you have, we have instructions. And the best thing for us to do is morning and evening, follow those instructions. Make sure that those instructions are followed as faithfully as you can. Then let your heart and your mind roam free. Find that which fascinates you, but then always, you know, I used to, Swami Prabhavananda left the world very quickly after I knew him. I only knew him for 3.5 years. Swami Swahananda, who came to take responsibility for the Vedanta Society of Southern California, he came in December of 1976 and left in October of 2012. So there was the possibility of studying with him for decades. And so going and seeing him in his room, taking walks with him, all that was very possible. It's not so easy in that Swami Sarvadevananda is not so close and available to you. But he does want his disciples to be in touch with him. And he does want to be responsive to them. So you can check with him, you know, Swami, I've developed an interest in this, and what can you offer me that will help me either fulfill something by doing this, or give me guidance as to what to add to it or how to think about it. He will be more than happy to do that with you. So he wouldn't discourage you from looking into other aspects of spiritual disciplines, as Vivekananda said, through work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, one or more or all four of these. So whatever suits your intelligence, your capacity, but stay in touch with your teacher. Stay in touch with your teacher. He will want to give you as much as he possibly can. That is his absolute heartfelt wish. I guarantee it.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara, this is Keith.
Yeah, hello, Keith.
Hey, I sent you a chat there, and you know, I don't want to tie everybody's time up with it or whatever, but you read that and kind of let me know. This is not a question for everybody.
Okay, I will take a look at it, and could you send it to me as an email? That always helps me because of my vision.
Sure. What's your email address?
Use kempergw@gmail.com. That's simplest.
Okay. Read that back. KEMPER, G as in go, W as in walk@gmail.com.
Right. KemperGW@gmail.com.
Or P as in Paul, right?
Yeah. KEMPER.
All right. Will do. Thank you.
So, and I will answer. Hello, Cindy. So, it seems like we've had our say for this morning, early afternoon. I'm sorry we can't all gather and share snacks and fellowship, but I'm really glad of this this way of Zooming ourselves together. And I want you to know that pains have been taken to help assure that those people called Zoom bombers won't be able to invade our meetings. Real efforts have been made, not by me, but the people who know what they're doing with this technology to assure that we won't be interrupted by trolls. And I'm so glad of that. So with that, we'll close with our usual lovely chant for peace. Oh, let there be peace in outer space.
Let there be peace
Peace in outer space.
Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters.
Let there be
Let there be
peace
peace
in
in
the
the
sky,
sky, on
the
the
earth,
earth.
and in the waters.
Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees.
Let there
Let there
be
be peace in the herbs, plants, and trees.
May the gods be peaceful.
May the gods
Let's be peaceful.
May the whole universe be pervaded by peace.
May the
The
whole
whole universe
be pervaded by
by
peace.
peace.
Let this infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being.
Let this
This
infinite
universal peace
prevail
prevail throughout my
my
beings.
being.
Om Shanti Shanti
Shanti,
Shanti.
Shanti.
Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere.
Everywhere.
And you know, I think it's very interesting to reflect on the fact that Swami Vivekananda said, the microcosm reflects the macrocosm and vice versa. The macrocosm reflects the microcosm. So this turmoil, this turbulence, this transformation that is going on here on the earth, this is a universal thing. This is not just us here. This is something going on with universe. As Einstein pointed out, and he pointed it out with such emphasis and sincerity, there is no such thing as separation. It is completely an illusion. So whatever is going on, when we have this, when we make this prayer for peace, let this infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being, yes. Let this peace prevail throughout the universe. Let it. So we want Shanti for all beings. And as I said, those of you who are inclined, at 3 o'clock every day, but especially on 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, there is a half an hour of organized, that is to say, people doing it all at once. There may be something that you can Zoom or into or otherwise meet, but if you just do it on your own, even if you're not otherwise technologically connected, 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon. 3 o'clock is an auspicious time in the day. And so this is a good time that this is happening. So if you sit and offer your heartfelt prayer for all that are suffering and for the relief of suffering. Swami Prabhupada was absolutely adamant that it has a great effect. So, Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Durga Durga Durga. See you all again soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brother Shankar.
Thank you, dear.